What if everything you thought you knew about history was just the tip of a vast, hidden iceberg? Picture this: entire civilizations, legendary cities, and earth-shaking events, all vanished from the records, surviving only in whispers passed down through generations. These aren't just stories, they're echoes of a world we've lost, fragments of truth buried beneath layers of time, waiting to be uncovered. Today, we're diving into 30 of the most astonishing ancient myths of the lost world, tales so powerful they've shaped empires, inspired explorers, and left historians arguing for centuries. Think about the last time you heard a story that sent chills down your spine, a legend so vivid it felt real. Now imagine that story isn't just fiction, but a distorted memory of something that once truly existed. From the sunken city of Atlantis to the golden streets of El Dorado, these myths aren't mere fantasies. They're puzzles, each one holding clues to civilizations that may have been far more advanced or far stranger than we ever realized. Why do these stories endure? Because they tap into something primal in us, the thrill of the unknown, the hunger to uncover secrets older than written history itself. This isn't just a journey through dusty old tales. It's an expedition into the heart of human imagination and the shadows of our past. Some of these myths have been dismissed as pure fantasy until archaeologists stumbled upon ruins that matched the descriptions. Others remain tantalizingly out of reach, their truth still hidden beneath jungles, deserts, or the depths of the ocean. But one thing connects them all: they challenge what we think we know. So if you've ever wondered what lies beyond the edges of the history books, if you've ever felt that itch to uncover the forgotten, stick around, because the stories we're about to explore don't just belong to the past. They're part of a mystery that's still unfolding, and by the end, you might never look at history the same way again. Of all the lost civilizations whispered about in ancient texts, none captures the imagination quite like Atlantis. The story begins with Plato, the Greek philosopher who first described it around 360 BCE. He painted a picture of an island empire brimming with unimaginable technology, advanced engineering, towering structures, and even energy sources beyond our understanding. But then, in a single day and night of catastrophe, it supposedly sank beneath the waves, vanishing forever. What makes this myth so compelling isn't just the mystery of its disappearance, but the haunting question: could a civilization that sophisticated have actually existed? Plato claimed Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, placing it somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. But over centuries, explorers and scholars have proposed wildly different locations. Some argue it was a real place swallowed by the Mediterranean, pointing to the volcanic eruption that obliterated the island of Thera around 1600 BC. Others look to the Caribbean, linking Atlantis to the submerged ruins near the Bahamas, where strange underwater formations spark debate. There are even theories that Plato's story was purely allegorical, a cautionary tale about hubris and the fall of empires. Yet every few years, new discoveries, a sunken city off the coast of Spain, anomalous artifacts in the Azores reignite the debate. So why does Atlantis persist in our collective consciousness? Maybe because it speaks to something deeper than archaeology. It's a mirror for our own fears and aspirations, a civilization wiped out by its own ambition. A warning about the fragility of human achievement. Or perhaps it's the lingering hope that somewhere, hidden beneath the ocean, lies proof that we're not the first to reach such heights. Whether fact or fable, Atlantis isn't just a story. It's a riddle that keeps us searching, reminding us that history might still hold secrets we've only begun to dream of. From lush paradise to forbidden fruit, few myths have shaped human culture like the Garden of Eden. Unlike Atlantis's technological marvels, Eden represents something more profound, a lost innocence, a paradise just out of reach. The biblical version tells of a divine garden where Adam and Eve lived in harmony until curiosity doomed them, But dig deeper and you'll find this story didn't spring from nowhere. Its roots twist back to ancient Mesopotamia, where similar tales of sacred gardens and fallen humanity flourished centuries before the Bible was written. Take the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories ever recorded. In it, a wild man named Enkidu is civilized by a woman mirroring Eve's role in Eden and loses his primal connection to nature. Even the concept of a life-giving tree appears in Mesopotamian myths, guarded by serpents, just like Eden's forbidden tree. Coincidence? Hardly. These parallels suggest Eden wasn't just a Hebrew invention, but a shared cultural memory retold across civilizations. But was Eden purely symbolic, or could it have been a real place? Scholars have scoured the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the very rivers Genesis says bordered Eden, for clues. Some point to the lush marshlands of southern Iraq, where the ancient Sumerians believed their gods dwelled. Others argue for locations as far-flung as Armenia or even the Persian Gulf, which was dry land thousands of years ago. One tantalizing theory links Eden to the lost Dilmun civilization, a trading hub described in Mesopotamian texts as a pure and bright land of abundance. What makes Eden's myth endure isn't just the mystery of its location, but its timeless questions. Is the story a warning about the cost of knowledge? A metaphor for humanity's shift from hunter-gatherers to farmers? Or perhaps, like Atlantis, it's a fragment of some forgotten truth, a paradise drowned by rising seas or buried beneath desert sands. Whether literal or symbolic, Eden's allure lies in its promise that somewhere buried deep in our collective past, there was once a place where we belonged completely. And that longing to return to a world unbroken might be the most human thing of all. Long before satellite mapping or plate tectonics, the idea of lost continents wasn't just fantasy, it was science. Or at least, that's what many believed in the 1800s, when a theory emerged about a sunken land called Lemuria. Unlike Atlantis, which came to us through ancient philosophy, Lemuria was born from a very modern problem: monkeys. British zoologist Philip Sclater noticed something odd. Fossils of lemurs, those big-eyed primates, were found in India and Madagascar, but nowhere in between. How did they get there? His answer: a vanished continent, once connecting the two lands, which he named Lemuria after the creatures it supposedly carried. At the time, this wasn't fringe science. Before we understood continental drift, sunken land bridges were a go-to explanation for strange animal distributions. But then, something unexpected happened. Lemuria slipped from textbooks and into the realm of the occult. Enter Madame Blavatsky, the charismatic founder of Theosophy. In the late 1800s, she transformed Lemuria from a scientific hypothesis into a spiritual battleground. Her writings described it as the home of an ancient, egg-laying race of giants with psychic powers, whose downfall came from what else? Misusing advanced technology. Sound familiar? Blavatsky's Lemuria was a cosmic sibling to Atlantis, part of a cyclical view of history where civilizations rise, fall, and leave behind esoteric secrets. Her ideas spread like wildfire, inspiring everything from early science fiction to modern New Age beliefs. But what does science say today? Plate tectonics shattered the original land bridge theory. We now know Madagascar and India were once joined, yes, but as part of the supercontinent Gondwana, which broke apart over millions of years, not in some catastrophic sinkhole. As for Blavatsky's giants, no fossil evidence, no geological traces, just a cautionary tale about how easily science can blur into myth when gaps in knowledge meet human imagination. Yet here's the twist: Lemuria's legacy isn't just about being wrong. It's a window into how myths are born. Science needed an answer, spirituality craved a mystery, and together they created something enduring. Even now, whispers persist of submerged ruins off the coast of Tamil Nadu, or tribal legends in the Pacific that speak of a drowned homeland. Whether those are echoes of a real lost world or just another layer of the story, well, that's the magic of Lemuria. It's not a place anymore. It's a mirror reflecting our endless fascination with the idea that somewhere beneath the waves of time lies a world we've forgotten. Among all the tantalizing myths that lured explorers into the unknown, none burned brighter in the medieval imagination than the kingdom of Prester John. This wasn't just a legend, it was a lifeline for a Europe gripped by crisis. Crusades were failing, the Mongol threat loomed, and the Christian world felt besieged. Then, in the 1200s, whispers spread of a mighty Christian king ruling a paradise of untold wealth and divine power somewhere beyond the Islamic lands. His name, Prester John, the myth began with a letter, or rather, a series of forged letters purportedly from Prester John himself, addressed to the Pope and European monarchs. They described a realm where pepper grew like forests, rivers ran with gold, and unicorns roamed alongside pious subjects, but this wasn't just a fairy tale. The letters struck a chord because they played on two deep-seated medieval obsessions: the search for allies against Islam and the dream of a righteous kingdom untouched by corruption. For centuries, popes and kings sent envoys eastward, convinced Prester John's armies would join them in a holy war. What's fascinating is how the legend shifted with geography. First, he was placed in India, linked to the Nestorian Christians scattered along the Silk Road. Then, as Mongol conquests revealed Central Asia had no such paradise, the myth migrated to Ethiopia, a real Christian kingdom, but one isolated enough to remain shrouded in mystery. Portuguese explorers like Vasco da Gama carried maps marked with Prester John's realm well into the 1500s, convinced they'd find him in Africa. But here's the twist: the myth wasn't entirely fiction. It wove together fragments of truth, stories of Ethiopia's ancient churches, rumors of Mongol Khans sympathetic to Christianity, even echoes of the Silk Road's marvels. Like all enduring legends, it was a mosaic of hope and misunderstanding. And while no utopian kingdom materialized, the search for Prester John had real-world consequences. It drove exploration, expanded European maps, and proved how powerfully a story could alter history. In the end, Prester John's greatest legacy wasn't a lost kingdom, but the journeys he inspired, reminding us that sometimes the myths we chase matter more than the truths we find. Gold, it was the fever that drove men mad, stripping away reason until all that remained was hunger, the relentless, burning need to possess the unimaginable. This is the heart of the El Dorado myth, a legend born not from whispers of a lost city, but from a breathtaking ritual witnessed in the highlands of Colombia. The Muisca people, masters of goldsmithing, had a tradition that would ignite centuries of obsession. When a new leader rose to power, they coated his body in gold dust, rowed him to the center of Lake Guatavita, and plunged him into the waters as offerings of emeralds and golden figurines sank beneath the surface. To Spanish conquistadors, this wasn't ceremony, it was proof. If a single chief could be drenched in gold, what unimaginable treasures lay hidden in the jungles beyond? The name El Dorado itself evolved from this ritual. Originally El Hombre Dorado, the Golden Man, it morphed in the telling from a gilded king to an entire city paved with gold. Gonzalo Pizarro, brother of the infamous Francisco, led one of the first expeditions in 1541, hacking through the Amazon with hundreds of men and thousands of enslaved indigenous guides. They found nothing but disease and starvation, resorting to eating their own horses before straggling back hollow-eyed, but the myth refused to die. Each failure only fed the frenzy, as survivors spun tales of glimpsing golden rooftops in the distance or hearing tribes speak of a wealthy kingdom just beyond reach. What makes El Dorado so fascinating isn't just the scale of the delusion, but how it reveals the collision of worlds. The Muisca's gold held spiritual significance, symbolizing the sun's power, not currency, while the Spanish saw only profit. Their lust distorted every clue. A tribal story about a distant salt trade became directions to a golden metropolis. A chief's ceremonial headdress was evidence of streets lined with treasure. Even Sir Walter Raleigh fell under its spell, wasting 2 expeditions and his own fortune searching Guyana's jungles in the late 1500s, convinced the city lay near a lake he never found. Centuries later, we know the truth. El Dorado was never a place. It was a mirage, a metaphor for the conqueror's own greed. Yet the myth endures not just in pop culture, but in the very real scars left on the land. Modern archaeologists have recovered some of those Muisca offerings from Lake Guatavita, exquisite golden boats and figurines, proof that the real treasure was never hidden. It was tossed away right in front of them, sacrificed to waters they never bothered to understand. The idea that our planet might be hollow, hiding entire civilizations beneath our feet, isn't some modern conspiracy. It's a thread that runs through human history like a secret tunnel. Ancient cultures, from the Greeks to the Buddhists, spoke of subterranean realms where enlightened beings dwelled in perfect harmony. The Greeks whispered of Hades, a vast underground kingdom of shadows, while Tibetan Buddhists described Shambhala, a hidden paradise of wisdom nestled deep within the earth. But it wasn't until the 1700s that this concept took a wild turn towards science. Enter Sir Edmund Halley, yes, the comet guy. In 1692, he proposed that Earth wasn't solid, but a series of nested spheres spinning independently inside each other, with luminous atmospheres sustaining life. Why? To explain weird compass fluctuations. His theory caught fire among intellectuals, and by the 1800s, adventurers were scanning the poles for entrances to this inner world. Even the US government got curious in 1838. The infamous Hollow Earth expedition set sail, funded by eccentric millionaire John Sims, who believed openings at the poles led to a thriving interior. Spoiler, they found ice, lots of ice, but the myth didn't die, its shape shifted. By the late 19th century, occultists like Madame Blavatsky wove Hollow Earth into their cosmic lore, dubbing the inner realm Agartha, a land of advanced beings guarding ancient secrets. Then came the Nazis. In the 1930s, Heinrich Himmler's SS launched expeditions to Tibet and the Arctic, convinced Agartha's inhabitants were the Aryan ancestors wielding lost technology. They even sent scientists to scan for cave systems using infrared cameras, all while World War II raged overhead. The absurdity reaches its peak in the so-called Admiral Byrd diaries, forged accounts claiming the famed explorer flew into the North Pole entrance in 1947 and met telepathic beings. Never happened, but the story still fuels conspiracy forums today. So why does Hollow Earth endure? Maybe because it's the ultimate metaphor, a literal underworld where humanity's deepest fears and wildest hopes collide. It's the last uncharted frontier, a place where science fiction and spiritual longing merge. And while seismic waves have long proven Earth isn't hollow, the myth persists, reminding us that sometimes the most fascinating lies are the ones we want to believe. After all, if our planet's core isn't molten iron, but a hidden sun illuminating cities of crystal, that's a story worth digging for. High above the known world, beyond the biting winds of the north, the ancient Greeks believed in a paradise untouched by time, a land where the sun never set, sickness was unknown, and people lived for 1,000 years. They called it Hyperborea, the land beyond the north wind. Unlike most lost civilizations shrouded in catastrophe, Hyperborea wasn't destroyed, it was perfect. According to Greek poets like Pindar, this wasn't just some distant fantasy. Hyperborea was real, a blessed realm where Apollo himself spent his winters, worshipped by a race of giants with divine blood. The myths paint Hyperborea as a place of impossible harmony. Crops grew without sowing, cities gleamed with gold, and its people communicated through song instead of speech. Even the air carried healing properties, granting longevity so extreme that Hyperboreans chose to leap into the sea when they finally grew weary of life. But the most intriguing detail, the Greeks insisted they'd met them. Herodotus wrote of Hyperborean envoys delivering sacred offerings to Apollo's temple on Delos, wrapped in wheat straw for protection. Were these travelers real or just part of the myth? The line blurred even for the ancients. Fast forward to the 20th century and Hyperborea took a dark turn. Nazi occultists obsessed with proving Aryan superiority latched onto the myth as evidence of a lost white homeland. Figures like Heinrich Himmler funded expeditions to Scandinavia and the Arctic, convinced Hyperborea's giants were the Proto-Aryans, a master race of blonde, blue-eyed demigods. They scoured Icelandic sagas and Norse runes for clues, even sending teams to Tibet in search of genetic proof, linking Tibetans to these mythical northern ancestors. The irony, ancient Greek texts never described Hyperboreans as white. Their perfection was moral and spiritual, not racial. Today, some fringe theorists still hunt for Hyperborea, now reimagined as a lost Arctic continent submerged by shifting poles. Satellite images of strange formations under Greenland's ice or Siberian megaliths get spun into evidence, but the truth is Hyperborea's power was never about geography. It's a mirror for humanity's deepest longing, a place where pain and scarcity don't exist. Whether it was a distorted memory of real Arctic cultures, a metaphor for the Golden Age, or pure myth, Hyperborea endures because it asks a haunting question. What if paradise wasn't lost but simply waiting, just beyond the edge of every map we've ever drawn? In the vast blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean, where waves crash against scattered islands, there's a legend of a continent that vanished beneath the sea, one that supposedly rivaled Atlantis in grandeur. This is the lost land of Mu, a civilization said to have been the mother culture of humanity, its influence stretching from Egypt to the Americas. The man who popularized this idea wasn't an archaeologist or a historian, but a British-born explorer named James Churchward, who claimed in the 1920s that he'd uncovered ancient tablets revealing Mu's existence. According to him, this wasn't just another sunken city. It was the cradle of civilization itself, a paradise destroyed by earthquakes and volcanic fires 60,000 years before the pyramids were built. Churchward's story began with a tantalizing hook. While serving as a soldier in India, he befriended a Hindu priest who showed him sacred tablets written in a forgotten script, supposedly the language of Mu. Over years of study, Churchward decoded them, piecing together a saga of a vast continent spanning the Pacific, home to an advanced race of 60 million people who worshipped the sun and possessed technology beyond our understanding. His books depicted Mu as a utopia where humans lived free of disease, communicating telepathically, until catastrophe shattered their world, sending survivors fleeing to distant shores. These refugees, he argued, seeded the great civilizations of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and even the Maya. But here's where things get murky. Churchward's evidence was, to put it mildly, unconventional. No other scholars ever saw these tablets, and mainstream archaeologists dismissed his work as pure fantasy. His maps of Mu mirrored real Pacific island chains but inflated them to continental proportions, and his translations of indigenous texts were often creatively reinterpreted to fit his narrative. Even his timeline clashed with established science 60,000 years ago. Modern humans were just beginning to migrate out of Africa, let alone build sprawling metropolises. Yet despite the skepticism, Mu captured imaginations. Part of its appeal lay in timing. The early 20th century was obsessed with lost worlds. King Tut's tomb had just been discovered, and explorers were racing to uncover ancient secrets. Mu offered a fresh mystery, one that conveniently explained cultural similarities across the globe without the messy complexities of independent invention or gradual trade networks. Modern science hasn't been kind to Churchward's claims. Plate tectonics confirms no continent sank in the Pacific recently enough to match his timeline. Linguistic and genetic studies show no sudden diffusion of a master culture, but rather slow, organic connections between peoples. Yet Mu's legacy lingers, repurposed by everyone from New Age spiritualists to conspiracy theorists. Some point to underwater structures near Japan's Yonaguni as proof, though geologists argue they're natural formations. Others tie Mu to fringe theories about alien visitors or energy vortexes. What makes Mu fascinating isn't its plausibility, but its endurance as a symbol. Like Atlantis, it taps into a deep human desire to believe that scattered across our planet's surface are fragments of a greater, forgotten whole. Whether Churchward genuinely believed his own theories or spun them to captivate audiences hardly matters now. Mu endures because it's more than a lost land. It's a mirror reflecting our longing for connections between cultures across time and beneath the waves that might never have existed but feel tantalizingly possible. Of all the 7 wonders of the ancient world, none sparks as much debate as the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, described by Greek historians as a lush, tiered paradise rising above the desert, with waterfalls cascading through terraces of exotic plants. It's a vision of human ingenuity defying nature. But here's the twist: despite its fame, no physical evidence of the gardens has ever been found in Babylon. Not a single brick, inscription, or contemporary account from the time of King Nebuchadnezzar II, who supposedly built them for his homesick wife around 600 BC. So where does that leave us? Either archaeologists haven't dug deep enough, or the gardens never existed at all. The primary sources we rely on aren't eyewitnesses. The earliest descriptions come from Greek writers like Berossus and Strabo, writing centuries after Babylon's heyday. Their accounts are vivid but vague, like a game of historical telephone where details blur with each retelling. Even Herodotus, the father of history, who visited Babylon in the 5th century BCE, never mentioned the gardens. That silence is deafening. If something as spectacular as a towering, irrigated garden complex existed, why would he skip it? Unless, of course, it was a later invention, a poetic exaggeration meant to symbolize Babylon's wealth and power. Some scholars propose a fascinating workaround. Maybe the gardens weren't in Babylon at all. Ancient texts mention another Mesopotamian king, Sennacherib of Assyria, who built an elaborate system of canals, aqueducts, and gardens in his capital, Nineveh, around 700 BC. His inscriptions boast of a wonder for all peoples, with exotic plants watered by an advanced network of screws and lift technology, matching Greek descriptions of the Hanging Gardens. Even the geography fits better. Nineveh's proximity to mountains made irrigation more plausible than flat, arid Babylon. Could the Greeks have conflated 2 great cities over centuries of storytelling? Then there's the engineering puzzle. Babylon's hot, dry climate made sustaining such gardens a logistical nightmare. Without an efficient water-lifting system like the Archimedes screw, which didn't exist in Nebuchadnezzar's time, how could enough water reach towering terraces? Sennacherib's engineers, on the other hand, left behind detailed records of their hydraulic innovations, making Nineveh a stronger candidate. But if the gardens were really in Assyria, why does Babylon get the credit? Blame the Greeks again. By their era, Babylon's name carried more mythic weight, a symbol of decadence and hubris. What better setting for a paradise that defied the desert? The mystery deepens when we consider propaganda. Nebuchadnezzar's inscriptions detail his building projects meticulously: palaces, walls, temples, yet never the gardens. Meanwhile, Sennacherib's boasts about his gardens align with his persona as a king who reshaped nature to flaunt his dominance. It's possible later rulers, or even Greek conquerors like Alexander the Great, grafted Nineveh's achievements onto Babylon's legend to amplify its grandeur. After all, empires thrive on stories that magnify their legacy. What's left then? A tantalizing blend of fact and fiction. The Hanging Gardens might be a composite, a real engineering marvel from Nineveh, blended with Babylon's mythic reputation and polished by Greek imagination into an icon of wonder. Or perhaps they're pure allegory, a vision of earthly paradise meant to remind us of humanity's fleeting attempts to conquer nature. Either way, their absence from the archaeological record hasn't dimmed their allure. Because sometimes the most enduring wonders aren't those we can dig up, but those we can't stop dreaming about. Off the storm-battered coast of Brittany, where the sea gnaws at the cliffs like a restless beast, lies one of Europe's most haunting legends, the drowned city of Wise. Unlike Atlantis, which vanished in a single cataclysm, Wise's downfall was steeped in moral reckoning. The story goes like this. In the 5th century, a pious Breton king named Gradlon built a magnificent city below sea level, protected by towering dikes and a single bronze gate with a key he kept around his neck. His daughter Dahut, reckless and rebellious, threw lavish parties where wine flowed and morals crumbled. One stormy night, seduced by a mysterious knight, some say the devil himself, she stole her father's key and opened the gate. The ocean roared in, swallowing Wise whole. Gradlon barely escaped on his magical horse, but Dahut, the waves took her, transforming her into a siren whose cries still echo in the mist. What makes Wise so compelling isn't just its dramatic end, but how deeply it's woven into Breton identity. For centuries, fishermen claimed to hear church bells ringing beneath the waves near Douarnenez Bay, and locals swore they glimpsed crumbling spires at low tide. The story served as a cautionary tale against hubris and sin, yes, but also as a whispered explanation for the very real coastal erosion that's devoured Brittany's shores for millennia. Geologists confirm that rising sea levels since the Bronze Age have submerged entire settlements here, leaving behind eerie remnants like the Neolithic megaliths now standing in the shallows off Karnak. Could Wise be a distorted memory of one such loss? 19th century historians latched onto this idea, proposing Wise was the capital of the Osismai, a Celtic tribe whose lands were slowly eaten by the sea. Others point to the Roman port of Carillion, whose ruins lie underwater near Plaugano. But the most tantalizing clue came in 1984, when divers exploring the Bay of Douarnenez found a submerged wall and paved road dating to Gallo-Roman times, precisely where medieval maps placed Wise. Skeptics argue these could be fish traps or quarry remains, but for believers, they're fragments of Dahut's doomed playground. The legend's endurance lies in its duality. It's both a parable and a potential historical echo, a reminder that the sea doesn't just erase cities, it absorbs them into myth. Even today, when storms lash Brittany's coast, you'll hear elders murmur, "Dahut is restless." Because some stories don't just explain the past, they haunt it. For centuries, the Amazons were dismissed as pure myth, a Greek fantasy of barbaric women who loathed men, cut off their own breasts to shoot better, and raised daughters while abandoning sons. But what if these warrior women weren't just figments of patriarchal imagination? What if they walked this earth not as the man-hating caricatures of legend, but as real, formidable fighters whose story was twisted by those who feared them? The truth, buried beneath layers of propaganda and poetic license, is far more fascinating than the myth. Start with Herodotus, the ancient historian who wrote about Amazons not as monsters but as people. He claimed they were Scythians, nomadic horsemen from the steppes of what's now Ukraine and southern Russia. For ages, scholars rolled their eyes, then came the graves. In the 1990s, archaeologists excavating Scythian kurgans burial mounds found something unexpected. Skeletons buried with bows, arrows, swords, and armor, their bones scarred by battle wounds. At first, they assumed these were male warriors, but DNA testing revealed something startling. Nearly 40% of these armed skeletons were female. Not just buried with weapons, but buried as warriors, their legs bowed from years on horseback, their injuries matching those of frontline fighters. This wasn't an isolated find. From the Caucasus to the Black Sea, similar graves emerged, women interred with axes, quivers full of arrows, even elaborate headdresses marking their high status. One teenage girl, discovered in western Russia, lay with a dagger at her hip and an iron arrowhead lodged in her skull, proof she died in combat. These weren't Greek fantasies. They were the real Amazon Scythian women who rode, hunted, and fought alongside men. Their lives a far cry from the manless tribe of myth. So how did their story get so distorted? Blame the Greeks. Athenian society, where women were confined to the home, couldn't fathom female warriors, so when they encountered Scythian women horseback archers who fought as equals, they spun them into monsters. The cut-off breast myth, likely a misunderstanding. Scythian women wore leather armor that flattened the chest for riding, and the Greek word amazos might not mean without breast at all, but without grain, a nod to their nomadic lifestyle. Even the infamous tales of Amazonian infanticide crumble under scrutiny. Greek vase paintings often show Amazons tenderly cradling babies, and Scythian burials include children laid to rest with care. The most delicious irony, the Greeks feared Amazons as invaders, but their own cities were likely saved by them. Recent research suggests Scythian warrior women may have fought as mercenaries for Greece in key battles. Imagine that the very monsters they vilified standing guard on Athenian walls. What's left then is a story not of myth but of erasure. The Amazons weren't a cautionary tale. They were a testament to the diversity of ancient womanhood, fierce, free, and far more complex than the Greeks dared to admit. And every arrowhead pulled from a woman's grave is a silent rebuttal, piercing the heart of the lie that warriors were ever just men. They called it Cibola, the legendary 7 cities of gold shimmering somewhere in the uncharted deserts of North America. To the Spanish conquistadors, it was more than a rumor. It was an obsession, a glittering prize that lured them deeper into a land they barely understood. The myth didn't spring from thin air. It began with whispers from shipwrecked explorers and Franciscan friars, stories passed down by Pueblo tribes about prosperous cities built of stone and adorned with turquoise. But by the time these tales reached Spanish ears, they'd transformed into something far more intoxicating, entire metropolises where gold was as common as clay. The man who took the bait was Francisco Vázquez de Coronado, a young nobleman hungry for glory. In 1540, armed with a royal commission and fueled by the account of a mysterious guide named Estebanico, an enslaved African who'd survived earlier expeditions, Coronado led an army of hundreds north from Mexico. Their journey was brutal. They crossed scorching deserts, forded raging rivers, and clashed with indigenous tribes who saw them not as liberators but as invaders. When they finally reached the Zuni Pueblo of Huaca, what they found wasn't a golden paradise. It was a fortified village of adobe bricks, its people ready to fight. Coronado's own helmet was dented by a well-aimed stone in the skirmish that followed. The City of Gold was just another pueblo, beautiful in its own right, but devoid of the treasure they'd imagined. Yet the legend refused to die. Coronado pressed on, his men starving and disillusioned, chasing rumors of a wealthy land called Quivira farther east. What they discovered were the nomadic tribes of the Great Plains, living in buffalo hide lodges, impressive, but again, not the gilded utopia they sought. The expedition became a cautionary tale of colonial hubris, a warning that greed could blind even the most determined explorers. But here's the twist: the 7 cities of gold might not have been pure fiction. Archaeologists now believe the myth was a cultural collision, a case of 2 worlds talking past each other. To the Pueblo peoples, wealth wasn't measured in gold, but in trade goods like turquoise, macaw feathers, and intricate pottery, treasures that did flow between their cities. The Spanish, steeped in their own dreams of El Dorado, mistook metaphor for literal truth. Even the number 7 held sacred significance for Pueblo cosmology, representing the cardinal directions and the cosmic order. It was never about counting cities, but about conveying a worldview. The legacy of Cibola lingers in the American Southwest, etched into place names and local lore. Modern pueblos like Taos and Acoma still stand, their multi-story dwellings echoing the descriptions that once set conquistadors' hearts racing. And perhaps that's the real lesson of the 7 cities, not about the failures of those who searched, but about the resilience of those who built them. The true gold wasn't in the ground. It was in the thriving cultures that had already mastered the art of living in harmony with a harsh and beautiful land. Coronado returned empty-handed, but the cities he sought were never lost. They were just waiting to be seen, not for what the Spanish wanted them to be, but for what they truly were. Beyond the icy mists of the north, where the sun barely kisses the horizon even in summer, the ancient Greeks believed there lay a land so remote it marked the very boundary of the known world Thule. First mentioned by the explorer Pytheas in the 4th century BCE, this mysterious place was described as an island 6 days' sail from Britain, where the sea congealed into a slushy mass and the sun never set during midsummer. To Pytheas, Thule wasn't just a geographic curiosity. It was the ultimate frontier, a place where nature itself seemed to bend the rules, but here's where things get murky. Pytheas' original writings are lost, surviving only in fragments quoted by later historians like Strabo and Pliny the Elder, who scoffed at his claims. Some scholars argue Thule was Norway or the Shetland Islands, while others insist it was Iceland, where the midnight sun aligns perfectly with Pytheas' descriptions. The Vikings might have agreed their sagas spoke of a distant land called Thule or Tyle, a place of eternal ice and eerie light. Yet Thule's real power wasn't in its physical location, but in what it symbolized, the edge of human exploration, the last blank space on the map before the unknown began. Then came the 20th century, and Thule's myth took a dark turn. Nazi occultists scrambling to fabricate a glorious Aryan past latched onto Thule as the ancestral homeland of a pure Nordic race. The Thule Society, a secretive group founded in 1918, blended esoteric symbols, runic lore, and pseudoscience to argue that Thule's inhabitants were Hyperborean superhumans, tall, blonde demigods whose bloodline had been corrupted by mixing with lesser races. This twisted fantasy seeped into Nazi ideology, fueling Hitler's obsession with racial purity and territorial expansion. Heinrich Himmler even sent expeditions to Scandinavia, convinced that relics of Thule's master race lay hidden in Viking burial mounds. The irony is thick enough to chip with an ice pick. The real Thule, if it existed at all, was likely a trading post or a fog-shrouded island glimpsed by an intrepid Greek sailor, not a fortress of Aryan supremacy. Modern genetics has debunked the Nazi myth entirely, revealing Europe's long history of migration and mixing. Yet the name persists today. Thule lives on as a U.S. airbase in Greenland, a car rack brand, and a symbol of how easily exploration's romance can be weaponized into propaganda. What makes Thule endure isn't just the mystery of its location, but its duality. To the ancients, it was a beacon of human curiosity. To the Nazis, it was a tool for hate. And to us, a reminder that the stories we tell about the edges of the world say far more about our fears and desires than they do about the land itself. The real Thule might be lost to time, but its legacy, that's still being written. Death wasn't the end for the ancient Greeks, it was a crossroads. While most souls wandered the asphodel meadows of the underworld, a select few earned passage to a realm beyond sorrow, the Elysian fields. Imagine a place where the air carried the scent of blooming orchards, where heroes and the virtuous spent eternity in leisurely bliss, feasting under skies untouched by storms. Homer first painted this picture in the Odyssey, describing it as a land at the edge of the world, where fair-haired Rhadamanthus ruled and life was free from snow, free from storm. But what began as a hero's reward would evolve into something far more democratic and leave fingerprints on Western dreams of paradise that linger even now. The Elysium myth shifted dramatically over centuries. Early Greek poets reserved it for demigods like Achilles or men favored by the gods, but by the time of Plato, the gates had widened. Philosophers argued that Elysium wasn't just for the sword-strong, but for the morally pure, those who lived with justice and wisdom. This wasn't just wishful thinking. It reflected Greece's changing values, shifting glory from battlefields to civic virtue. The Romans ran even further with the idea, blending it with their own ancestor cults. To them, Elysium became the Campo dei Fiori, a sunlit meadow where families reunited in the afterlife, picnicking among fields of golden wheat. Virgil's Aeneid immortalized this vision, describing it as a place of green groves and blessed seats, where heroes practiced archery and poets recited verse forever. But here's where things get fascinating. Elysium's influence didn't stop at antiquity. Medieval Christian scribes, struggling to reconcile pagan myths with scripture, quietly repurposed its imagery. Dante's Divine Comedy placed the virtuous pagans in a sunlit castle at the edge of hell, eerily reminiscent of Homer's description, while Renaissance artists painted saints in landscapes cribbed straight from Virgil's meadows. Even America's early settlers invoked Elysium when naming towns like Philadelphia, brotherly love, imagining their city upon a hill as a new paradise for the righteous. The real power of the Elysian fields lies in its adaptability. It's been a warrior's reward, a philosopher's ideal, a Roman family reunion, and a Puritan's promised land. Unlike later visions of heaven with strict dogma, Elysium was fluid, a mirror for whatever a culture valued most, and perhaps that's why it endures. Whether we call it Shangri-La, Valhalla, or the good place, the human craving for a perfect rest never fades. The Greeks just gave it a name, and a sunset no one wanted to leave. Among the most enduring biblical mysteries is the fate of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, vanished communities said to have been scattered by Assyrian conquerors in the 8th century BC. According to scripture, these tribes were exiled from the kingdom of Israel after its fall, swallowed by history so completely that even their descendants remain unknown. But over centuries, explorers, theologians, and conspiracy theorists have spun wild and wonderful theories about where they might have gone. From the hills of Ethiopia to the plains of North America, the hunt for these lost tribes has reshaped religions, ignited cultural movements, and even altered the course of nations. One of the most persistent theories links the tribes to Japan. Proponents point to eerie parallels between ancient Hebrew customs and Japanese Shinto rituals, salt purification rites, ceremonial ram's horn blowing, even the layout of certain shrines resembling Solomon's temple. Some go further, suggesting the Japanese imperial family descends from Jewish royalty, citing cryptic symbols on ancient artifacts, but historians push back. These similarities, they argue, are coincidence or the result of later cultural exchange along the Silk Road. Still, the idea persists, fueled by groups like the Black Hebrews, who claim not only the lost tribes but all global Jewish heritage traced back to Africa and Asia. Across the Atlantic, another theory took root in the early days of European colonization. Spanish missionaries, encountering the intricate cultures of the Americas, became convinced Native Americans were the lost Israelites. They cited practices like circumcision, animal sacrifice, and even linguistic quirks. Like the Cherokees' alleged use of Hebrew-sounding words, this belief wasn't just academic. It fueled the Mormon movement, with Joseph Smith declaring indigenous peoples descendants of an Israelite migrant named Lehi. DNA testing has since debunked direct lineage, but among some Navajo and Apache communities, oral traditions still speak of a crossing from the east, leaving room for whispers of an older connection. Perhaps the most explosive claim comes from Ethiopia, where the Beta Israel community has long identified as descendants of the tribe of Dan. Their traditions speak of a queen, perhaps the famed Sheba, bridging their lineage to King Solomon. Genetic studies show some ancestral links to Middle Eastern populations, but the debate rages on, complicated by politics, faith, and the weight of identity. For the Beta Israel, recognition as one of the lost tribes wasn't just about history, it was a lifeline, granting them the right to emigrate to Israel under the law of return. So why does this myth endure? Maybe because the lost tribes aren't just a historical puzzle. They're a blank slate, a story that lets any culture claim a piece of sacred history. From British Israelism, which absurdly tied Anglo-Saxons to ancient Israelites, to modern conspiracy theories weaving the tribes into UFO lore, the 10 tribes have become a mirror for every generation's obsessions. The truth, they likely assimilated into neighboring lands, their bloodlines diluted by time. But as long as people yearn to belong to something older and grander, the lost tribes will never stay buried. They'll keep resurfacing, not in ruins or relics, but in the stories we tell about who we really are. High in the thin air of the Himalayas, where snow leopards prowl and monasteries cling to sheer cliffs, there exists a legend of a valley untouched by time, a paradise hidden behind veils of mist and ice. We know it today as Shangri-La, thanks to James Hilton's 1933 novel Lost Horizon, but its roots dig far deeper into the ancient soil of Tibetan folklore. Hilton's fictional utopia, with its ageless lamas and library of eternal wisdom, didn't spring from his imagination alone. It was a shimmering mirage crafted from centuries of whispered tales about Baal, sacred hidden valleys where enlightenment wasn't just a goal, it was the very air one breathed. Long before Hilton penned his bestseller, Tibetan Buddhists spoke of Baal Pamoko, a network of secret sanctuaries carved into the eastern Himalayas by the 8th century Guru Padmasambhava. These weren't just spiritual metaphors. Pilgrims risked their lives to find them, believing these valleys, shielded by labyrinthine gorges and supernatural forces, were physical refuges for when the world grew dark. To enter, one needed purity of heart, not just a map. Some seekers claimed to stumble upon places where flowers bloomed year-round, where streams hummed with mantras, and where time moved differently. The parallels to Hilton's Shangri-La are unmistakable, but here's the twist. Unlike his static paradise, Baal were said to shift locations, revealing themselves only to the worthy. This myth collided with Western obsession in the early 20th century, when explorers like British botanist Frank Kingdon Ward returned from the Tsangpo Gorge with tales of a lost waterfall and subtropical jungles hidden behind glacial walls. Newspapers sensationalized his findings, dubbing the region the Tibetan Shangri-La, and soon even scientists were caught up in the hunt. The Nazis, ever eager to claim Aryan wisdom, sent Ernst Scheffer's SS expedition to Tibet in 1938, seeking the cradle of civilization in these very valleys. They found no ageless lamas, just rugged landscapes and bemused monks. Yet the allure persists. Modern searches focus on the Yarlung Tsangpo Grand Canyon, where rumors swirl of monasteries tucked into cliffs, accessible only by secret tunnels. Chinese authorities fueled the mystery by renaming a Tibetan county Shangri-La in 2001 to boost tourism, complete with a replica lamasery straight out of Hilton's novel. But the truth, as always, is subtler. For Tibetan Buddhists, the real Baal was never about geographic coordinates. It's a state of mind, a reminder that paradise isn't a place to find, but a way of seeing. So why does Shangri-La still captivate us? Maybe because it's the perfect metaphor for our own restless search, for meaning, for peace, for a world untarnished by time. Hilton gave it a name, but the dream was always there, etched into the ice and rock of the highest mountains on Earth, and perhaps that's the real magic. Whether hidden valley or heavenly fiction, Shangri-La endures because it asks the one question we can't resist. What if the greatest adventure isn't out there at all, but within? The dream of eternal youth is as old as humanity itself, but no legend has embodied that yearning quite like the fountain of youth, most connected to Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon, who supposedly scoured Florida's swamps in 1513 searching for its magical waters. But here's the twist, there's no solid evidence he was actually looking for it. The myth likely got glued to his story decades later by historians eager to spice up his failed colonization efforts. The real irony, Ponce de Leon was after something far more tangible, land, gold, and political favor, yet somehow his name became forever tied to a fantasy he might never have pursued. Long before Ponce de Leon set sail, the idea of rejuvenating waters bubbled through ancient cultures. The Greeks told of the river Styx, whose waters granted invulnerability, except for Achilles' infamous heel. Alexander the Great scribes wrote of a land of the blessed where springs reversed aging, a tale that may have filtered into medieval Europe through Arab scholars. Even the Bible's Garden of Eden, with its rivers promising eternal life, echoes this obsession. By the Middle Ages, European maps marked distant lands with cryptic phrases like, "Here lies the spring that restores youth," blending rumor and wishful thinking into geography. What transformed these fragments into the fountain of youth we know today? Blame the Taino people of the Caribbean. When Spanish colonizers arrived, locals spoke of Bimini, an island with a restorative spring. These stories, likely metaphorical perhaps about medicinal hot springs or spiritual cleansing rites, were seized upon by Europeans desperate to believe in miracles. Soon, the legend snowballed, fueled by bestsellers like Sir John Mandeville's Travels, a 14th century hoax packed with tales of immortality granting wells. By the time Ponce de Leon reached Florida, the fountain wasn't just a rumor, it was a cultural fever dream. Fast forward to today, and the myth hasn't dried up. It's just taken new forms. Silicon Valley billionaires pour millions into young blood transfusions and telomere-lengthening therapies, while wellness influencers hawk ancient anti-aging elixirs from the Amazon to the Himalayas. The language has changed, no more whispers of magical springs, but the premise remains identical, that somewhere, somehow, science or nature holds a secret to stopping time. Underneath it all lies a truth more revealing than any myth. The fountain of youth was never really about water. It's about the human refusal to accept limits, our hunger to conquer mortality, even when the cost is folly. Ponce de Leon didn't find his fountain, but in chasing it, he blazed a trail for all of us still searching, in labs or jungle temples, for the one thing no one has ever grasped forever. The Amazon rainforest has always been a place of mystery, a vast emerald labyrinth where even today uncharted tribes and undiscovered species lurk in the shadows. But in the early 20th century, one man became convinced that hidden beneath that dense canopy lay not just isolated villages, but an entire forgotten civilization, glittering cities built of crystal, humming with ancient knowledge. That man was Percy Fawcett, a British explorer whose obsession with the lost city he called Z would consume his life and ultimately vanish him into the jungle forever. Fawcett wasn't some wild-eyed dreamer spinning fantasies. He was a seasoned surveyor, a hardened veteran of the Royal Geographical Society who'd spent years mapping the most treacherous corners of South America. It was during these expeditions that he first heard whispers from indigenous tribes about ruins deep in the Mato Grosso, towers of stone, roads that led nowhere, and most tantalizing of all, structures said to shimmer like ice in the sunlight. The descriptions varied. Some spoke of a city ruled by a white-skinned king, others of temples filled with strange hieroglyphs. But Fawcett became convinced these fragments pointed to one thing: evidence of an advanced pre-Columbian civilization, perhaps even survivors of Atlantis itself, thriving in isolation. His theory wasn't entirely without merit. By the 1920s, archaeologists were uncovering startling evidence of complex Amazonian societies, vast earthworks, intricate pottery, and evidence of sprawling settlements. The idea that the rainforest had once supported urban cultures was gaining traction, but Fawcett took it further, stitching together indigenous legends, half-translated manuscripts, and his own intuition to paint a picture of Z as something almost otherworldly. He believed its people possessed esoteric wisdom, even psychic abilities, and that their city pulsed with a mysterious energy source, perhaps the legendary crystals of tribal lore. His final expedition in 1925 became the stuff of legend. Fawcett, his eldest son Jack, and Jack's friend Rolly Rimmel set off into the jungle near the Xingu River, armed with cryptic coordinates gleaned from a Portuguese document called Manuscript 512. Fawcett left explicit instructions: if they didn't return, no rescue party should be sent. The last communication was a letter handed to a native runner describing their approach to a dead horse camp and the conviction that they were close. Then silence. What happened next has fueled speculation for a century. Some say they were killed by hostile tribes. Others believe Fawcett found his city and chose to stay, absorbed into its secretive society. Conspiracy theorists whisper that Z was no earthly place at all, but a portal to another dimension. The truth we'll likely never know. Dozens of expeditions have searched for Fawcett or his city, only to vanish themselves or turn up empty-handed. Yet the myth endures, not just because of its mystery, but because it taps into something primal: the idea that even in our hyper-connected world, there are still places where the past might be waiting untouched. The Amazon keeps its secrets, and somewhere in that green darkness, whether as ruins or mirage, the crystal city of Z lingers, not just as a lost world, but as a reminder that some obsessions are deeper than maps can trace. For over 1,000 years, the ancient Egyptians wrote of a land so rich, so overflowing with wonders, that its very name became synonymous with abundance. Punt. Hieroglyphs describe voyages to this fabled place, where Egyptian ships returned laden with fragrances that perfumed the Nile, with gold that dazzled the pharaohs, and with beasts so exotic they seemed plucked from dreams. But despite meticulous records, Punt's location remains one of Egyptology's most tantalizing puzzles. Was it a real kingdom or an idealized land of plenty woven from travelers' tales? The answer lies somewhere between archaeology and myth. The earliest references to Punt appear in Egypt's 5th dynasty, around 2500 BC, but it was Queen Hatshepsut's famous expedition in the 15th century BC that etched Punt into history. The walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari depict the journey in stunning detail: ships with billowing sails, towering palms, and Puntite villages built on stilts above the water. The cargo lists read like a catalogue of ancient luxury: ebony, ivory, leopard skins, and most precious of all, frankincense and myrrh, resins so valuable they were worth their weight in gold. Hatshepsut's inscriptions boast of Punt's ruler, King Parahu, and his wife, Atii, whose exaggerated features, possibly a sign of disease or ritual modification, fascinated the Egyptian artists. But nowhere do the carvings give coordinates. Instead, they simply call Punt the terrace of the god, a phrase as poetic as it is geographically useless. Scholars have debated Punt's location for centuries, with theories stretching from the Horn of Africa to the Arabian Peninsula. The Somali coast is a leading candidate, matching descriptions of aromatic resins and the distinctive giraffes and baboons depicted in Hatshepsut's reliefs. Others argue for Eritrea or Yemen, where ancient ports thrived on the incense trade. But the most radical suggestion comes from a handful of researchers who believe Punt lay much closer to Egypt, perhaps in the Sudan's Nubian desert, where recent discoveries of gold mines and abandoned trade routes hint at a lost network of wealth. What makes Punt endure isn't just the mystery of its geography, but what it represented to the Egyptians. This wasn't merely a trading partner, it was a semi-mythical realm, a place where the gods might walk among mortals. Some texts even describe Punt as the homeland of Egypt's deities, a sacred origin point for their culture. That blurring of reality and reverence is key. Punt may have been a real kingdom, but to the Egyptians it was also an idea, an eternal other place where the ordinary rules of scarcity didn't apply. Modern archaeology hasn't closed the case. In 2010, DNA analysis of mummified baboons from Egypt traced their origins to Eritrea and Ethiopia, lending weight to the African theory. Yet the debate rages on, fueled by periodic claims of underwater ruins or forgotten inscriptions. Perhaps that's fitting. Punt was never meant to be pinned down. It exists in the cracks between history and legend, a reminder that even the most precise civilizations need a little mystery, a land just beyond the maps where the air smells of incense and the ground glitters with gold. The concept of an eternal paradise reserved for the undying isn't unique to any one culture, but few versions are as hauntingly vivid as the White Island of Hindu mythology. Known as Ashveta Dvipa in ancient Sanskrit texts, this wasn't just a heavenly retreat. It was the abode of the Siddhas, immortal sages who had mastered the secrets of the universe, living in a realm of pure white radiance where time stood still. The Mahabharata describes it as a place shining like the moon, hidden somewhere in the far north beyond the Sea of Milk, a phrase later interpreted by some as the Arctic Ocean. What's fascinating is how this description mirrors another legendary isle halfway across the ancient world, the Greeks' Luke or White Island, where heroes like Achilles were said to dwell after death, their bodies untouched by decay, bathed in eternal sunlight. The parallels are too striking to ignore. Both traditions place their paradises in distant, inaccessible waters, Hindu texts pointing north, Greek myths placing Luke near the mouth of the Danube in the Black Sea. Both describe the inhabitants as transcendent beings, the Siddhas with their esoteric knowledge, Achilles and Helen living in bliss under the rule of the sea god Poseidon. Even the symbolic whiteness recurs not just in the names, but in the imagery of pristine shores and luminous structures. Could these legends be fragments of a shared Indo-European memory? Or proof that certain archetypes' immortality, a land beyond the horizon, are universal? Some scholars argue the White Island might have a real-world counterpart. Hindu nationalists have long claimed it as Antarctica, citing descriptions of a land where the sun doesn't set for months as evidence of polar knowledge. More plausible theories point to Sri Lanka's Adam's Peak, whose summit gleams white with quartz and is revered by multiple faiths. The Greeks, meanwhile, may have been inspired by real islands like Snake Island in the Black Sea, where archaeological finds include ancient temples dedicated to Achilles. There's even a tantalizing link to the mysterious White Rock mentioned in Egyptian texts, a trading post possibly located in the Aegean. But perhaps the most compelling angle isn't geographic but psychological. The White Island's enduring appeal lies in its duality, a place both physical and metaphysical. To Hindus, it represented the ultimate spiritual ascent, to Greeks a reward for heroic glory. Both versions offered something rare in ancient cosmology, not just an afterlife but a continuation, a realm where the greatest among us weren't just remembered but literally still lived. That idea that excellence could cheat death itself resonates across millennia. Whether as a snowy peak, a sunlit atoll, or a metaphor for transcendence, the White Island endures because it tells us the most seductive lie of all, that somewhere for someone the rules don't apply. Off the jagged coast of Cornwall, where the sea churns with a restless fury, lies a legend as deep and dark as the waters themselves, the lost kingdom of Lyonesse. Said to stretch from Land's End to the Isles of Scilly, this once prosperous land now sleeps beneath the waves, its towers and churches swallowed by a single catastrophic storm. Arthurian tales whisper that Lyonesse was the home of Tristan, the tragic knight whose love story mirrored Camelot's own doomed romance. But this isn't just a backdrop for medieval poetry. The myth of Lyonesse pulses with something far older, a memory of disaster written into the rocks and tides of Cornwall shore. What makes Lyonesse unique among drowned lands is its eerie specificity. Unlike Atlantis or Mu, its boundaries were meticulously recorded in medieval texts. The 15th century Chronicle of the Kings of Britain describes it as a fertile realm of 140 churches, lush pastures, and bustling ports until one winter's night when the sea burst its bounds and erased it forever. Fishermen along the Cornish coast still speak of hearing ghostly church bells ringing beneath the waves on stormy nights, a tradition so persistent it's woven into local folklore. Even Tennyson immortalized Lyonesse in Idylls of the King, painting it as a land where fragments of forgotten peoples dwelt, a phrase that hints at layers of truth beneath the legend. Geology lends chilling credence to these stories. Around 1800 years ago, rising sea levels submerged vast stretches of land between Cornwall and the Scilly Isles. Underwater surveys reveal submerged stone walls, field boundaries, and even what appear to be Bronze Age burial chambers, proof that communities once thrived where now only fish dart through the kelp. The Seven Stones Reef, a notorious shipwreck site, is said by locals to be the last remnants of Lyoness's capital, its jagged rocks the bones of a drowned city. In 2009, sonar scans identified a mysterious circular structure near the reef, sparking fresh debate. Was this a ceremonial site, a fort, or just a trick of the seafloor? The Arthurian connection adds another layer of intrigue. Some versions of the Tristan saga claim Lyoness was the seat of King Meliodas, Tristan's father, and that its fall foreshadowed Camelot's own collapse. This thematic mirroring two kingdoms lost to human folly and natural wrath suggests Lyoness served as more than setting. It was a cautionary tale, a mythical echo of Britain's own vulnerability to the sea. The timing fits too. The medieval texts describing Lyoness's destruction coincide with the real-life flooding of Doggerland, a vast North Sea plain swallowed by rising waters around 6500 BC. Could Lyoness be a distorted memory of that ancient trauma, passed down through generations? Today, Lyoness straddles the line between myth and history. Diving expeditions continue to probe the waters off the Scillies, uncovering arrowheads, pottery, and tools that confirm human habitation. Yet the kingdom itself remains elusive, its name absent from Roman or Saxon records, its grandeur preserved only in verse. Perhaps that's the point. Lyoness isn't just a place we lost, it's a story about loss itself, the inevitability of nature's reclaiming power, and the fragile footprint we leave behind. The sea keeps its secrets close, but in Cornwall's storms, in the fishermen's bells, and in the silent stones beneath the waves, Lyoness lingers, not as a city to be found, but as a whisper from the deep, reminding us that even the mightiest lands can vanish beneath the tide. Beneath the waves of the Indian Ocean, where the waters stretch endlessly between Madagascar and Australia, echoes the legend of Cymru Candaum, a lost continent said to be the cradle of Tamil civilization. Unlike Atlantis or Lemuria, this sunken world isn't just a footnote in global myth. For millions of Tamil people, it's an ancestral heartbeat, a vanished homeland whispered about in ancient Sangam poetry and etched into the cultural DNA of southern India. The stories describe a vast landmass that once connected India to Africa and Australia, a thriving paradise where the first Tamil kings ruled over cities of unparalleled sophistication. Then, in a cataclysm of rising seas, it was swallowed whole, leaving behind only scattered islands and a people haunted by the memory of what was lost. The earliest references appear in Sangam literature, Tamil texts dating back over 2,000 years. Poems speak of a Pandyan kingdom consumed by the ocean, of scholars carrying palm leaf manuscripts to higher ground as the waters advanced. One particularly haunting verse describes the sea taking 49 lands, leaving survivors to rebuild on the remaining scraps of territory, modern-day Sri Lanka and southern India. These aren't just poetic metaphors. Geological studies confirm that sea levels rose dramatically around 12,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age, submerging vast stretches of continental shelf in this region. Could Cymru Candaum be a cultural memory of that real flooding, passed down through generations? Yet the myth took on new life in the 19th century, when colonial scholars and Tamil nationalists began framing Cymru Candaum as the Tamil Atlantis. Figures like Pandit Nalaswami Pillai argued the lost continent was the birthplace of all human civilization, claiming Tamil, not Sanskrit, was the world's first language. By the 20th century, this idea had morphed into a political rallying cry, with activists citing Cymru Candaum as proof of Tamil superiority over northern Indian cultures. Some even linked it to fringe theories about Lemuria, despite the two legends having entirely separate origins. The most controversial twist came with the pseudo-science of Kumari-Kandam's advanced technology. Certain Tamil nationalist groups insist the continent was home to flying machines and cosmic energy devices, citing the same kind of exaggerated interpretations of ancient texts that fuel Atlantis conspiracy theories. Mainstream archaeologists bristle at these claims, pointing out that while submerged ruins like the Gulf of Combat do exist, including what appear to be man-made structures dated to 7500 BCE, there's zero evidence of a continent-spanning superculture. What makes Kumari-Kandam stand apart from other lost lands is its living legacy. For many Tamils today, it's not about proving the existence of cities under the sea. It's about cultural identity, a symbol of resilience and continuity against centuries of linguistic and political marginalization. The myth persists in literature, film, and even scientific conferences, where scholars cautiously explore the kernels of truth behind the legend. The real Kumari-Kandam may never be found, but its power endures, not as a sunken ruin, but as a testament to how myths can shape history as surely as any flood. The legend of Jason and the Golden Fleece reads like the ultimate ancient treasure hunt, a daring voyage into the unknown fueled by betrayal, magic, and the promise of unimaginable wealth. But what if the fleece wasn't just a mythical trophy? What if this story, passed down for millennia, holds coded truths about the real-world gold trade and maritime exploration of the Bronze Age? Peel back the layers of gods and monsters, and you'll find clues suggesting this epic might be more than fantasy. It could be a shimmering reflection of ancient economics and engineering. Start with the fleece itself. Described as glowing gold and hung in a sacred grove guarded by a dragon, it sounds like pure myth. Yet historians have long noted parallels between this imagery and an actual gold mining technique used in the ancient kingdom of Colchis, modern-day Georgia in the Caucasus. Here, miners would stretch sheepskins over wooden frames, then pan for gold in mountain streams. The fleece's fibers trapped tiny gold particles, turning each hide into a glittering prize. Over time, legends could have exaggerated this practical tool into a supernatural artifact. Even the dragon might be a metaphor for the treacherous tribes protecting these lucrative mining territories, ones that Greek merchants would have desperately wanted to access. Then there's the Argos voyage, often dismissed as pure fiction. But the route Jason supposedly took from Greece through the Dardanelles across the Black Sea to Colchis mirrors real Bronze Age trade networks. Archaeological evidence shows Mycenaean Greeks were actively trading with Colchis by 1500 BCE, lured by its reputation as a land of gold. The myth's most fantastical stops, like the clashing Symplegades rocks, might encode navigational hazards. The rocks could represent the dangerous Bosphorus currents, where tides forced ships to time their passage carefully, just as Jason waited for the perfect moment to sail through. Even the harpies, those winged tormentors, may personify the seasonal storms that plagued Black Sea crossings, but the deepest clue lies in the fleece's symbolism. In ancient Greece, wool was a measure of wealth woven into the very fabric of their economy. Gold, meanwhile, represented raw power. By fusing the two, the myth might be telling a story about control over trade routes. Jason's quest wasn't just about grabbing treasure, it was about securing the supply chain that brought gold from the Caucasus to Greek palaces. His betrayal by King Pelias, who sends him on this deadly mission, echoes the cutthroat politics of monopolizing resources. The most compelling evidence, Colchis wasn't just a random setting. It sat at the crossroads of major trade arteries linking Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Greek merchants would have faced fierce competition from Hittites, Assyrians, and local tribes, all battling for access to Colchian gold. Jason's trials fighting armored warriors, outwitting a sorceress queen, could symbolize the diplomatic and military struggles of real-world traders. Even Medea, often reduced to a vengeful witch, might represent the complex alliances Greek colonists formed with local elites, marriages that secured trading rights but often ended in bloodshed. So was the Golden Fleece real, not as a single glowing hide, but as a metaphor for the dangerous, high-stakes world of ancient resource extraction? Absolutely. The myth endures not because of its magic, but because it captures a universal truth: the lengths humans will go to control the sources of wealth and the stories we tell to justify the pursuit. From sheepskins in Georgian rivers to the boardrooms of modern corporations, the quest for the Golden Fleece never really ends, it just changes shape. Deep in the windswept wilds of Patagonia, where the Andes plunge into icy fjords and the sky stretches endless and unforgiving, there's a legend of a city that flickers like a mirage, El Dorado's spectral cousin, the Ciudad de los Césars. Unlike the golden utopias of the tropics, this phantom metropolis was said to be a refuge of exiled Incas and Spanish survivors, its streets paved with silver, its churches roofed in gold, and its very existence shifting with the snowdrifts. But what makes this myth so haunting isn't just its treasure. It's the eerie specificity of its whispers. Sailors swore they glimpsed its spires glowing at dawn. Stranded explorers told of finding warm meals laid out in abandoned huts, as if invisible hands still tended the hearths. And then there were the stories of the giants Patagonia's native Tehuelche people, whose towering stature fed European fantasies of a lost race guarding the city's gates. The legend began with shipwrecks and desperation. In 1540, the Spanish expedition of Francisco de Camargo vanished near the Strait of Magellan. Decades later, rumors surfaced that some survivors had fled inland, merging with Inca refugees fleeing the conquest of Peru. Together, they supposedly built a new world utopia, blending Andean ingenuity with European masonry. By the 1700s, the story had morphed again. Now the city was said to be populated by the ghosts of conquistadors, cursed to wander their gold-laden streets until Judgment Day. Jesuit missionaries added their own twist, claiming the city was a sanctuary for their martyred brethren, its walls inscribed with divine prophecies. What's fascinating is how the myth mirrored real-world tensions. Patagonia was a liminal space on colonial maps, a terra incognita where European logic faltered. The Tehuelche's nomadic lifestyle, moving with the seasons, might explain the city's ephemeral reputation. A campfire scene one evening could vanish by morning, fueling tales of a disappearing citadel. Even the gold might have been a misinterpretation of the region's pyrite deposits, glittering deceptively in the glacial streams, yet the most compelling parallel lies in its function. Like Shangri-La or the Seven Cities of Cibola, the City of the Caesars wasn't just a place, it was a psychological bomb. For colonists stranded at the world's edge, it offered hope that somewhere in that brutal landscape, warmth and order endured. For the church, it was a beacon of divine redemption, and for the indigenous peoples, perhaps a sly subversion, a story weaponized to lure greedy invaders deeper into the lethal cold. Today, the myth lingers in hushed alpine villages and trekkers' yarns. Satellite imagery has mapped every inch of Patagonia, yet some still swear the city hides in plain sight, veiled by storms or some ancient Inca magic. Because that's the power of such tales, they thrive not in the found but in the search. The real city of the Caesars was never brick or gold. It was the human need to believe that beyond the next ridge, beyond the next blizzard, something glorious waits just out of reach. Among the mist-shrouded legends of Arthurian lore, few places hold as much mystical allure as the Isle of Avalon, a sanctuary where Excalibur was forged, where Arthur was taken to heal after his final battle, and where some say he still sleeps, waiting to return in Britain's hour of need. But Avalon isn't just a fairy tale backdrop. Its roots dig deep into Celtic spirituality, its name whispered in medieval texts as Unis a Fallen, the Isle of Apples, a fruit sacred to ancient druids for its symbolism of immortality. And nowhere is this myth more tangibly felt than in the rolling hills of Glastonbury, where history, faith, and pure imagination collide. The connection between Avalon and Glastonbury began with a convenient twist of fate, or perhaps a clever bit of 12th century marketing. In 1191, monks at Glastonbury Abbey claimed to have uncovered the graves of Arthur and Guinevere beneath their church, a discovery that conveniently aligned with the abbey's need for funds after a devastating fire. Suddenly, the watery marshes surrounding Glastonbury Tor were reimagined as the remnants of Avalon's enchanted isle, framed by the logic that the landscape had shifted over centuries. Never mind that early Welsh texts placed Avalon firmly in the otherworld, a realm accessible only through magic or divine favor. The monks' version stuck, grafting Arthur's legend onto English soil with the precision of a sacred graft. Yet Glastonbury's claim isn't entirely without merit. Long before Christianity arrived, this was a site of pagan reverence. The Tor, with its spiral terraces and natural springs, mirrors descriptions of Celtic Shia holy mounds believed to be portals to the otherworld. The nearby Chalice Well, its waters tinged red from iron deposits, became linked to the Holy Grail, blending Arthurian myth with older fertility rites. Even the apples of Avalon find echoes in Glastonbury's orchards, which were famous for their rare varieties long before the monks arrived. Coincidence? Perhaps, but in the interplay of landscape and legend, coincidence often wears the guise of destiny. Modern pagans and spiritual seekers have embraced Glastonbury as a living Avalon, a thin place where the veil between worlds feels achingly fragile. Every summer solstice, crowds climb the Tor at dawn, hoping to glimpse the otherworld in the morning mist. The ruins of the abbey, now a pilgrimage site for Arthur enthusiasts and neo-druids alike, thrum with the energy of layered beliefs: Christian, Celtic, and something harder to define. Shops sell crystal Excaliburs, and local guides lead tours to the Glastonbury Zodiac, a sprawling, prehistoric earthwork some believe encodes Arthur's kingdom in the contours of the land. What makes Avalon endure isn't just its association with a king, but its adaptability. To the medieval monks, it was a tool for revival; to the Celts, a metaphor for the afterlife. To today's mystics, a beacon of esoteric truth, and beneath it all lies a deeper question. Do places become sacred because we believe in them, or do they call us because they've always been sacred? Glastonbury offers no easy answers, only the whisper of apples on the wind, the glint of something golden in the well, and the unshakable sense that some stories aren't meant to end. They're meant to transform, just like the isle itself, rising anew from the mists of each generation's imagination. Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian known as the father of history, wrote of an Egyptian marvel so vast it dwarfed even the pyramids, a labyrinth near Lake Moeris that housed 3,000 rooms across 2 sprawling levels, its walls covered in intricate carvings and its halls filled with the echoes of 1,000 secrets. He claimed to have walked its corridors himself in the 5th century BC, dazzled by its scale and complexity, declaring it beyond my power to describe. Yet today, despite centuries of searching, no trace of this colossal structure has been definitively found. How could something so grand simply vanish? The answer lies in the shifting sands of time, politics, and the tantalizing possibility that Herodotus himself might have blurred fact with legend. The labyrinth wasn't just a maze, it was a spiritual and administrative powerhouse. Herodotus described it as the heart of Egyptian governance, where every nomarch regional ruler had their own sacred chamber to store records and hold rituals. Beneath this labyrinthine complex, he claimed, lay a burial vault for 12 sacred crocodiles, mummified in gold and worshipped as manifestations of the god Sobek. The sheer audacity of the description, its fusion of bureaucracy, religion, and mythical creatures has divided scholars for centuries. Was this a first-hand account of a real place or a traveler's tall tale embellished over time? Modern archaeology hasn't been silent on the matter. In 2008, a team using ground-penetrating radar near the Hawara Pyramid, just south of Cairo, detected the outlines of a massive subterranean structure. The scans revealed a grid-like pattern spanning several football fields, matching Herodotus' description of passages through the walls and twisting paths that lead back on themselves. But before excavations could begin, political unrest in Egypt stalled the project, leaving the discovery unverified. Other scholars argue the labyrinth might have been plundered for its limestone during Roman times, its stones repurposed for nearby cities like Fayum. The most compelling counterargument comes from those who believe Herodotus was describing the mortuary temple of Amenemhat III, whose ruins at Hawara do feature a complex layout suggestive of a maze. Yet even this theory falters. The temple's remains are fragmentary, and nothing survives to match Herodotus' account of golden doors or towering columns. Some suggest the labyrinth was never a single structure, but a composite memory of multiple Egyptian administrative centers, their grandeur condensed into one mythical edifice by Greek awe. What's at stake isn't just the existence of a building, but the reliability of history itself. Herodotus' labyrinth forces us to question where documentation ends and imagination begins. Perhaps the real labyrinth isn't buried under Egyptian soil. It's woven into the human love for stories too magnificent to be confined by mere facts. Until a discovery proves otherwise, the lost labyrinth remains both a challenge to archaeologists and a tribute to the power of a well-spun tale. Imagine a world where roasted pigs wander freely with knives stuck in their backs, begging to be eaten, where rivers flow with wine, cheese rains from the sky, and houses are built of cake. Welcome to the land of Kokani, a medieval fantasy so absurd it could only have been born from the brutal realities of peasant life in Europe. While kings and clerics preached about the virtues of hard work and heavenly rewards, the common folk dreamed up this gluttonous utopia where no one lifted a finger and abundance was the only law. This wasn't just a fairy tale, it was a collective middle finger to the backbreaking labor, constant hunger, and rigid social order that defined daily existence for most people in the Middle Ages. The earliest written versions of Kokani appear in 13th century poems, scribbled in the margins of manuscripts by monks who clearly needed a break from their vows of abstinence. In these stories, work was punishable by law, sleeping all day was the highest virtue, and laziness the greatest achievement. Need a meal? Just lie under a tree with your mouth open, and poached eggs would slide right in. Thirsty, the streets were paved with custard and fountains spouted spiced ale. Even the weather bent to human desire. Snow was made of flour, and hail was roasted capons ready to eat. The sheer excess of it all wasn't just funny, it was revolutionary. In a world where peasants toiled under feudal lords and the church preached eternal suffering for earthly pleasure, Kokani was a subversive joke that cut straight through the hypocrisy. But beneath the satire lay a darker truth. Medieval Europe was a place of chronic scarcity. Crop failures, wars, and the Black Death made starvation a constant threat. Bread was often adulterated with sawdust or ground acorns to stretch supplies, and meat was a luxury few could afford. The average peasant survived on a diet of gruel, coarse bread, and whatever roots or greens they could forage. Against this backdrop, Kokani wasn't just fantasy, it was survival psychology. Dreaming of rivers flowing with milk wasn't escapism, it was a coping mechanism for people who'd never tasted butter. The myth also exposed the absurdity of medieval hierarchy. In Kokani, social roles were gloriously inverted. Priests tripped over their own robes running to brothels, nobles scrubbed floors for fun, and geese flew straight into cooking pots wearing their own garnish. This wasn't just humor, it was a coded critique of a system that kept peasants starving while bishops feasted. Even the geography mocked the establishment. While real medieval maps placed Jerusalem at the center of the world, Kokani was always far to the west, beyond the reach of taxes and tithes. Yet Kokani's legacy outlasted the Middle Ages. Traces of it linger in modern culture, from the chocolate factories of Willy Wonka to Instagram's endless buffet posts. The difference: today's excess is attainable, at least for some, while medieval peasants knew their dreams would never materialize. That's what makes Kokani so poignant. It wasn't just a land of plenty, it was a mirror held up to inequality, a reminder that every era gets the paradise it desperately needs but can never have. And maybe that's why the myth endures, because in a world still divided by hunger and wealth, the idea of a place where everyone gets to rest, feast, and laugh at the rules will always feel deliciously rebellious. High in the rocky cliffs of Mali, where the Bandiagara escarpment cuts through the Sahel like a jagged scar, the Dogon people have preserved a secret for centuries, a celestial knowledge that defies conventional explanation. Their oral traditions speak of Sirius, the brightest star in our night sky, with a precision that baffled astronomers when it was first recorded. The Dogon didn't just describe Sirius A. They knew of its tiny, invisible companion, Sirius B, a white dwarf star so dense its discovery in the 19th century required the most advanced telescopes of the era. Yet here was an isolated African tribe with no written language or optical instruments, speaking of a star they called Potolo, the smallest thing there is, a tiny grain of matter heavier than all iron on Earth, orbiting Sirius every 50 years. This revelation exploded into Western consciousness in the 1930s, when French anthropologists Marcel Grioul and Germain Dieterlen lived among the Dogon for years, meticulously documenting their cosmology. The Dogon didn't just describe Sirius B's existence, they depicted its elliptical orbit, knew its 50-year rotational period, and even illustrated its relationship to Sirius in intricate sand drawings. Their priest spoke of a third star in the system, Emya, which astronomers still debate today. How could a people without telescopes perceive what science took millennia to confirm? Enter the ancient astronaut theorists, writers like Robert Temple, in his 1976 book The Sirius Mystery, argued this wasn't just coincidence, it was evidence of extraterrestrial contact. The Dogon, he claimed, had been visited by amphibious beings from the Sirius system thousands of years ago, who imparted this knowledge as part of a cosmic legacy. Temple pointed to Dogon mythology describing the Namo, fish-like creatures who descended from the sky in a spinning arc, bringing wisdom and civilization. To believers, this was undeniable proof that advanced interstellar travelers had once walked the Earth, but skeptics fired back with equal force. Astronomer Carl Sagan countered that the Dogon's ancient knowledge might actually be the result of cultural contamination. By the 1920s, Sirius B's discovery was global news, and European missionaries, traders, or even Grioul's own team could have inadvertently introduced the concept to the Dogon before their cosmology was formally recorded. Others noted that Grioul's methods were controversial. His interviews relied heavily on a single elder, and some anthropologists argued he may have led his subjects toward answers that fit his own preconceptions. Even the Namo's description bears a striking resemblance to Christian baptismal imagery, suggesting possible syncretism with missionary teachings, yet the mystery deepens when we consider the broader context. The Dogon weren't alone in their Sirius obsession. Ancient Egyptian temples at Dendera align with Sirius's heliacal rising, linking it to the goddess Isis. Sumerian texts describe the boat of heaven arriving from Sirius. Could these threads point to a shared, forgotten connection, or just humanity's universal fascination with the brightest star in the sky? The real lesson of the Sirius mystery isn't about aliens or telescopes. It's about the fragility and resilience of knowledge itself. Whether the Dogon's wisdom came from star visitors, colonial cross-pollination, or an unbroken oral tradition stretching back millennia, their story forces us to ask how much of our own scientific certainty is built on assumptions. And what might we still have to learn from cultures we've too quickly dismissed as primitive? The stars whisper secrets, but the answers, it seems, are still written in the sand. Deep in the shifting sands of the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter of the Arabian Peninsula, lies the legend of Iram, the city of 1,000 pillars. Described in the Quran as a paradise of towering structures, Iram was the playground of the powerful Ad tribe, a people so steeped in arrogance that they defied the warnings of the prophet Hud. Their punishment was swift and absolute. A cataclysmic sandstorm swallowed the city whole, leaving no trace but whispers carried on the desert wind. Unlike Atlantis or El Dorado, Iram's story isn't just a cautionary tale. It's a divine rebuke, etched into scripture and etched into the collective memory of the Bedouin tribes who still speak of its ruins with wary reverence. What makes Iram uniquely compelling is its intersection of faith and archaeology. For centuries, scholars dismissed it as pure allegory until the 1980s, when satellite imagery revealed a web of ancient trade routes converging near the Oman-Yemen border. Among these ghostly paths was a site dubbed Ubar, a legendary desert hub mentioned in Ptolemy's maps and Arabian folklore as the Atlantis of the sands. Excavations in the 1990s uncovered massive fortifications, pottery shards, and evidence of a thriving frankincense trade, all buried beneath layers of wind-blown sediment. The most haunting discovery: collapsed sinkholes, suggesting the city hadn't just been abandoned, it had been violently consumed by the earth itself. The parallels between Iram and Ubar are impossible to ignore. Both were centers of wealth and hubris, both linked to the incense trade that fueled ancient empires, and both met sudden, apocalyptic ends. But here's where the mystery deepens. Islamic scholars debate whether Iram and Ubar were one and the same, or if Ubar was merely a later settlement built atop Iram's cursed grounds. The Quran's description of Iram's lofty pillars could align with Ubar's ruins, where columns of petrified wood still protrude from the dunes. Yet Bedouin oral traditions insist Iram lies elsewhere, hidden deeper in the empty quarter, protected by jinn and shifting sands that confound modern explorers. Modern technology keeps the hunt alive. Ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR scans have identified anomalies beneath the desert rectangular formations that could be foundations or merely tricks of geology. Meanwhile, climatologists note that the region's abrupt desertification around 3,000 years ago matches the timeline of Iram's supposed fall. Was the city's destruction a literal act of divine intervention or a poetic framing of ecological collapse? The answer may lie in the ruins themselves, where fragments of inscriptions invoke the name Ad alongside pleas for mercy against encroaching dunes. Iram's legacy isn't just about lost gold or buried pillars. It's a mirror held up to humanity's oldest struggle, the tension between ambition and humility. The desert doesn't give up its secrets easily, but every gust of wind stirs the possibility that somewhere beneath the sand, 1,000 pillars still stand waiting to testify. High above the branches of Yggdrasil, the great world tree of Norse mythology, shimmered the golden halls of Asgard, a realm so divine its very name meant enclosure of the gods. Yet, unlike the distant heavens of other mythologies, Asgard existed in a tantalizing middle ground between the ethereal and the earthly. Ancient texts describe it as reachable only by crossing the rainbow bridge Bifrost, guarded by the watchful god Heimdall, yet also situated firmly within the Norse conceptual map of the cosmos, connected to Midgard, the human world, and the other 8 realms through roots and branches. This duality, both a celestial stronghold and a place tied to the physical world, makes Asgard one of mythology's most fascinating blends of the spiritual and the tangible. The Vikings didn't envision their gods as abstract or omnipotent. Odin, Thor, and the rest of the Aesir were flawed, tempestuous beings who bled, schemed, and faced their own impending doom at Ragnarök. Asgard mirrored this relatability. Its descriptions in the poetic Edda and prose Edda evoke not an untouchable paradise, but a fortified citadel with very real vulnerabilities. Its walls, built by a giant stallion in a mythic bargaining blunder, could be breached. Its gates faced constant threats from giants and other forces of chaos. Even the Rainbow Bridge wasn't just a symbol, it was a tactical choke point, the only entry to a realm perpetually preparing for war. This wasn't a metaphor for the afterlife, it was a reflection of Viking values, community, resilience, and the understanding that even divinity demanded vigilance. What's startling is how Norse cosmology mapped these mythic locations onto real landscapes. Medieval Icelanders believed certain waterfalls or geothermal vents were cracks between worlds, places where the veils between Asgard and Midgard thinned. The roaring hot springs of Jason were said to echo the primordial cauldrons of the gods, while the aurora borealis was imagined as the glint of Valkyrie's armor. This blurring of myth and geography wasn't poetic license, it was a worldview. When Viking explorers settled new lands, they often named sites after Asgard's landmarks, grafting their cosmology onto unfamiliar terrain. In Newfoundland, a place they called Vinland, they might have seen a cliff and thought, this is where Heimdall would stand. Fast forward to modern pop culture, and Asgard's malleability has made it a playground for reinvention. Marvel's comic books and later, the Mythical transformed it into a futuristic alien kingdom. Its golden spires more science fiction than saga. Yet even this techno-mythic version retains the core tension of the original, a place both magnificent and mortal. When Thor's home is shattered in Ragnarok, it's not just CGI spectacle, it's a nod to the Eddic prophecies of Asgard's fall. Video games like God of War take a darker turn, portraying the realm as a decaying empire of paranoid gods, while Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology reimagines it with a wry, humanistic touch, emphasizing the gods' pettiness and wit. Each reinterpretation asks the same question the Vikings did: what does it mean for power to have a place? Asgard thrives in modern storytelling because it's never just a setting. It's a character, a state of mind, a looming question. Is divinity a fortress or a bridge, a destination or a journey? The Norse didn't have tidy answers, and neither do we. That's why its golden gates keep swinging open in our imaginations, inviting us to cross Bifrost again and again, not as pilgrims, but as explorers in a myth that's still being written. From the sunken spires of Atlantis to the golden streets of El Dorado, from the whispered wisdom of Shambhala to the drowned bells of Lyoness, what unites these 30 ancient myths isn't just their vanishing acts, but their uncanny ability to shape the very fabric of human imagination. Each story, whether born from a philosopher's metaphor, a conqueror's greed, or a culture's collective memory, reveals something profound about who we are. These aren't just tales of lost places, they're mirrors reflecting our deepest fears, our wildest hopes, and our relentless drive to fill the blank spaces on the map with meaning. Consider the patterns. Some myths, like Avalon or the Elysian Fields, offer comfort promises that greatness or virtue will be rewarded beyond death. Others, like Iram or Sodom, serve as stark warnings of divine retribution. Then there are the puzzles: Plato's Atlantis, Mu's sunken continent, blurring the line between allegory and archaeology, daring us to dig deeper. And let's not forget the outright hoaxes like Prester John's letter, proving how easily a well-timed myth can alter history. What's remarkable isn't their differences, but how they all tap into the same primal itch, the certainty that somewhere, just out of reach, lies a world that could rewrite everything we think we know. The obsession isn't random. Lost worlds thrive in times of upheaval. The Middle Ages dreamed of Cocaigne's food-filled utopia while famine gripped Europe. The Industrial Revolution birthed a frenzy for hollow Earth theories as science redrew reality. Today, as climate change erodes coastlines and AI reshapes identity, our myths evolve too. Think viral conspiracies about underground alien bases or simulations hiding the real world. The names change, but the impulse doesn't. When the present feels unstable, we anchor ourselves to legends of what came before, or what might still be out there. But here's the real magic. These myths don't just reflect us, they reshape us. The hunt for El Dorado birthed brutal conquests but also mapped uncharted jungles. The fantasy of Hyperborea fueled Nazi madness, yet also inspired Arctic exploration. Even false leads have a way of stumbling onto truths. Ponce de Leon never found his fountain, but his quest carved Florida into the modern world. The lesson, whether fact or fiction, these stories don't just describe journeys, they launch them. So now we turn to you. Which of these lost worlds lingers in your imagination? Is it the high-tech paradise of Atlantis, the spiritual sanctuary of Shambhala, or the warrior's reward of Asgard? Maybe you've got a pet theory, an untold myth, a fringe archaeological find, or a hunch about where the next great discovery might lie. Drop it in the comments below. Because the thing about lost worlds is this: they're never really gone. They're just waiting for the next explorer, the next dreamer, the next person who looks at an old map or an old story and whispers,